Think back about 10 years. For me, I'm now in my early 40s, so for me that's my early 30s. If you think back to a memory about 10 years ago, just whatever comes to mind, think about where you were, who you were with, what you were doing, how you were feeling. So for me, I might think about the house that we lived in just after we were married. The kids came along. I can remember the way around the house. I can remember the furniture of the house. I can remember how it was laid out, little details. I remember what it was like in those early years when the children were so small. And when you think back to a memory for you about 10 years ago, that was you, right? That's still you, the same you. And that was just 10 years ago. That's you, and now you're 10 years older. And I think that's true. But there is this idea that all the cells in our body, well, just about all of them, with some exceptions, but most of the material that makes us up is recycled after about 10 years. So if you think back to that person you were 10 years ago, most of those cells are already gone. They're somewhere recycled, dissipated out into the world, as it were. So if we're holding on to that idea that that was me and that was you 10 years ago, then it's got to be more than just the material that makes us up, because we're now new material, new atoms, new cells. And that's a little bit of an introduction into this blog that I wanted to share with you, which is based on this idea called structural immortality, which I think is interesting. It's worth a bit of playing about with. So what do I mean by structural immortality? Well, it's the idea that, clearly, when we think about people, when we think about plants, when we think about man-made objects like cars, like toasters, clearly they've got an expiration date. They're not going to go on forever. They kind of get worn out and they conk. And that's the case whether, all the conditions remain perfect. So for a human, that can be, perfect diet, perfect climate, great opportunity for good mental health, lots of sort of social support, lots of relationships, lots of opportunity for new experience, that sort of perfect environment, stable environment. Even with all that, we'd still wear out and age and die. It's like there's a built-in expiration date, if you like. And that's even the case if you look at trees. An individual tree within a forest, and trees might live a lot longer than humans. Some oak trees can live for centuries. And even though the forests might go on and on and on, eventually the tree is going to wither and die. So that we are mortal creatures. Clearly we have our expiration date. We eventually give way to entropy, to think about things in a physicalist way. But then there are other things that do just go on and on and on. And they would go on and on and on, hypothetically, until the end of time, if the circumstances allowed. So you could think about the human reproductive cycle, for example. So although humans wear out, to the extent that humans continue to reproduce, we get generation after generation after generation, and it goes on and on and on, hypothetically without end, as long as circumstances allow. Or if you think about some of the social structures that we have, like the general election, and if you think about the US system, where it's set in stone every 4 years. Every 4 years, hypothetically, until the end of time, there will be a presidential election in the United States. It takes place in November, every 4 years. Or in my business, higher education. Higher education, we work from academic year to academic year to academic year, and there's really no prospective end to that. It just goes on and on and on. Or if you think about sports, the Football League, I dip in and out of an interest in football, and I was mad on it when I was a teenager. but the basic structures are the same as when I was a teenager. It goes on and on and on. And so, I mean, I'm not saying that there's something kind of magical going on. There is what I would call a structural immortality. And I literally mean by that the structure of these things allows them to go on and on and on forever, so long as the underlying conditions allow. What I've called, in quite a few blogs recently, the nesting systems. Those systems that underpin life and allow life to happen, as it were. And they can be material resources like food and water and oxygen and heat, peace and stability, social settings, and physical laws like gravity. They all create the nest, as it were, that supports these systems. And whether we're talking about mortal systems like human beings that have a lifespan and then die, or hypothetically immortal structures like the human life cycle, like cities or villages or forests that have no built-in expiration date, that could hypothetically go on forever. And so one of the pithy lines that I've offered in that blog is, the woman dies, but the village lives. The tree dies, but the forest lives. And where I go with the blog is a thought about information. So yes, that person that we were 10 years ago, maybe all the cells have been recycled, so none of that material is left. But there's a continuation of information. The information continues, and I've taken that a bit further and talked about an information heritage in the blog that straddles generations, actually, and goes on and on through the generations. And another way to think about that information heritage is, imagine a book, an actual physical book that you've got on the shelf in the library. The book itself will eventually give way to entropy. It'll start to wither and tatter. Bits will fall off it like dust. The binding will break down. The ink will fade. Pages will start dropping out. The book is mortal, if you like. But if we were able to faithfully transpose all the information within the book onto a new set of materials, a new book, whether it's paper, whether it's a digital copy, the book is mortal, but the information in the book is hypothetically immortal. As long as the nesting system allows, it will go on and on and on. And I just think there's something, I'm not talking about anything mystical, I'm not talking about anything that defies physical laws, but I think this idea of structural immortality is really interesting and worthy of a bit more exploration in future writing. So I hope you enjoy the blog, and as ever, let me know what you think.